A little girl gave her last dollar to a man. 5 years later, a millionaire knocks on her door. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The bitter December wind cut through the streets of downtown Portland like a knife, carrying with it the harsh reality of another freezing night. Snowflakes danced under the flickering streetlights, creating an almost magical atmosphere that belied the harsh realities of life on these unforgiving streets. In the shadows between two abandoned storefronts, 10-year-old Madison Parker clutched her worn backpack tighter against her chest, her blonde hair whipping around her face as she remembered that night 5 years ago that changed everything. She could still feel the bite of that winter wind from when she was just 5 years old, small for her age, with bright blue eyes that held an innocence that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances of her young life. Her family had been living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes not even that, surviving on whatever kindness they could find in a world that seemed to have forgotten people like them. That particular evening, December 15th, 2018, had been especially brutal. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel even colder. Madison remembered how her tiny fingers had gone numb despite the threadbare mittens her mother Christina had knitted for her from unraveled sweaters she'd found at the Goodwill store. She and her 14-year-old sister Ashley had developed a routine over the months leading up to that night. They would separate after dinner, when there was dinner, to cover more ground begging for spare change and leftover food from the restaurants along Morrison Street and the surrounding area. It was dangerous for two children to be out alone, but desperation had made their mother agree to the arrangement, albeit reluctantly. "Meet back at the Pioneer Courthouse Square fountain in exactly 2 hours," Ashley had whispered that night, giving Madison's small hand a gentle but firm squeeze. Ashley had always been mature for her age, forced to grow up quickly when their father abandoned them when Madison was barely 2 years old. "Stay on the main streets, little bird, and if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you run. You hear me?" Madison had nodded solemnly, understanding even at 5 that the world held dangers for little girls like her. But she also understood that their family needed every penny they could find. Their mother, Christina, worked 3 different jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a convenience store in the early morning, and serving coffee at a small cafe during the day, but it still wasn't enough to keep them afloat. The rent on their tiny 1-bedroom apartment was 3 months overdue, and their landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, had been making increasingly threatening noises about eviction. Madison had overheard her mother crying on the phone with someone about it just the night before, trying to negotiate just a few more days, promising that things would get better soon. That evening, Madison had wandered down a side alley she'd never explored before, following the warm glow and delicious smells coming from behind Romano's Italian kitchen. The aroma of garlic, fresh basil, and baking bread made her empty stomach clench with hunger so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days, surviving only on the water from public fountains and a stale dinner roll someone had given her the previous afternoon. The alley was narrow and dark, lit only by a single security light that cast long, eerie shadows against the brick walls. Dumpsters lined one side, overflowing with the detritus of city life, and Madison had learned to check them carefully for anything edible or useful that restaurants might have thrown away. That's when she first saw him. A man, perhaps in his early 30s, though it was hard to tell given his condition, sat hunched between cardboard boxes and overflowing garbage bags, creating a makeshift shelter against the bitter wind. His clothes were torn and stained, layers upon layers that spoke of someone who had been living rough for quite some time. His dark hair was matted and unkempt, his face gaunt with the hollow look of prolonged hunger and desperation. But it was His eyes that struck Madison most. They held a deep sadness that reminded her of the way her mother looked sometimes when she thought no one was watching. "Mister?" Madison's small voice cut through the night air, her breath creating little puffs of vapor in the freezing temperature. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, startled by the unexpected voice. His eyes widened in surprise at the sight of the tiny girl standing before him, her own clothes barely better than his own, her small frame trembling in the cold despite the oversized coat that was clearly a hand-me-down from someone much larger. I'm fine, sweetheart," he managed to say, his voice hoarse from disuse and the cold. "You shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous for a little girl like you." "I'm looking for food too," Madison said simply, stepping closer without the fear that most children would have shown. There was something about her that radiated warmth and compassion, even in the midst of her own difficult circumstances. "My sister Ashley and me, we do this every night. Mama's been really sick and can't work as much as she used to." It wasn't entirely true. Christina wasn't sick so much as she was exhausted from working multiple jobs and still not being able to make ends meet. But Madison had learned that sometimes a small fiction made people more willing to help, and she wasn't above using that knowledge when her family's survival was at stake. The man stared at her for a long moment, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. Compassion for someone other than himself, and a recognition of the strength it took for someone so young to be out here taking care of her family. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Madison Parker. What's yours?" "Michael," he replied, his voice catching slightly. "Michael Chen. And you're right to be looking for food. I've been looking for some myself for longer than I care to admit." Madison tilted her head, studying his face with the kind of wisdom that only comes from experiencing hardship at a young age. She had developed an ability to read people, to sense their intentions and their pain, that was far beyond her years. "Were you always like this?" she asked, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. "I mean, did you always live outside?" Michael let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "No, sweetheart. I used to have a job, a good job. I used to have a house with a big yard and a dog named Charlie. I used to have everything that most people think makes life worth living." "What happened?" Madison asked, settling down on a relatively clean patch of concrete near his makeshift shelter, as if she had all the time in the world to listen to his story. Michael looked at this little girl who was showing him more genuine interest and compassion than anyone had in months, and something inside him broke open just a little bit. "I trusted the wrong people," he said slowly, the words coming out like they had been trapped inside him for too long. "I had a business partner, someone I thought was my friend. We ran a small tech company together, developing software for non-profits. I was the creative side. He handled the business and finances. I thought we were building something good together, something that would help people." He paused, looking down at his hands, which were dirty and cracked from months of living rough. "But he was stealing from the company, taking money out of our accounts, setting up fake vendors, even stealing from our clients. By the time I found out, it was too late. He disappeared with everything, leaving me holding all the debt and legal responsibility." Madison listened intently, her young face serious with concentration. "I lost everything overnight," Michael continued. "The business, my house, my savings, my car. And when the money ran out and the creditors started calling and the lawyers got involved, my wife Sarah couldn't handle it. She took our daughter Emma and left, said she couldn't watch me destroy our family's future." "How old is Emma?" Madison asked quietly. "She's 10 now. Same age as you, I think. I haven't seen her in over a year. Sarah won't let me, says I'm not stable enough to be around Emma until I get my life together." Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. She knew what it was like to miss a parent, to wonder if they were okay, to wish things could be different. "That's really sad," she said simply. "I bet Emma misses you too." Michael's composure cracked at her words, and tears began to stream down his dirty cheeks. "I hope so. God, I hope so. But I don't blame Sarah for leaving. Look at me. What kind of father can I be like this?" Madison reached into the pocket of her oversized coat and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill, the only money she'd earned that entire day. An elderly woman outside the coffee shop where her mother worked had pressed it into her hand along with half of a turkey sandwich, telling her to buy something nice for yourself, honey. "Here," Madison said, holding the dollar out to Michael without hesitation. Michael's eyes widened in shock. "No, sweetheart, I can't take that. You need it more than I do. You're just a little girl, and you said yourself you're looking for food." Madison shook her head, her blonde curls bouncing with the movement. "You look hungrier than me. Besides, I already ate today." It was a lie. She hadn't eaten anything since that half sandwich the day before, but she told it with such conviction and compassion that Michael almost believed her. "I've gone lots of days without eating," she continued, pressing the dollar bill into his palm with her small, cold fingers. "I can handle one more. You look like you're hurting more than me right now, and Mama always says that when we can help someone else, even in a small way, we should do it." Michael stared at the dollar in his palm, crumpled and worn, but representing everything this little girl had to her name. Then he looked up at Madison, this tiny angel who had just given a complete stranger everything she possessed, asking for nothing in return. "Madison Parker," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion, "I don't know what I did to deserve meeting you tonight, but I want you to know something. I will never, ever forget this moment. I will never forget your kindness. And someday, somehow, I'm going to find a way to pay you back for what you've done for me tonight." "You don't have to pay me back," Madison said, standing up and brushing the dust off her coat. "You just have to get better. Promise me you'll try to get better." "I promise," Michael said, and for the first time in months he actually meant it. Madison had walked away that night, leaving Michael sitting in that alley with her dollar clutched in his hand and something new burning in his chest: hope. Now, 5 years later, Madison stood at that same corner where the alley met Morrison Street, remembering every detail of that encounter. She was 10 years old now, but the years had been hard on her family. Their situation had actually gotten worse rather than better. They'd been evicted from that one-bedroom apartment 6 months after her encounter with Michael, and since then, they'd bounced between shelters, friends' couches, and the occasional cheap motel room when Christina could scrape together enough money. Christina was still working multiple jobs, but the economy had been tough, and decent-paying work was hard to find for someone without a college degree. Ashley, now 19, had dropped out of high school when she turned 16 to work full-time at Murphy's Diner, trying to help support the family. She made decent tips on good days, but winter was always slow, and the tips had been getting smaller as people tightened their own belts. Madison herself had become quite resourceful over the years. She'd learned which restaurants threw away perfectly good food at the end of the night, which store managers might give her odd jobs in exchange for a few dollars, and which public places had the cleanest bathrooms and the warmest waiting areas when they needed a place to spend a few hours during the day. But she'd never forgotten that night with Michael, and she often wondered what had happened to him. Sometimes, when things got really bad, she would stand at this corner and remember the look in his eyes when she'd given him her dollar. She wondered if he'd kept his promise to try to get better. She wondered if he'd ever found his daughter, Emma. She wondered if he was still alive. The snow was falling more heavily now, and Madison was just about to head home to the small studio apartment they were currently renting week by week when she heard the sound of an expensive car pulling up to the curb beside her. She turned to see a sleek black BMW with tinted windows. The engine was so quiet she could barely hear it running, and the car was so clean and shiny that it looked completely out of place in this neighborhood. For a moment, Madison felt a flicker of fear. Fancy cars usually meant trouble in this part of town, either drugs or worse. The passenger window rolled down smoothly, revealing a man in an expensive charcoal grey suit. His hair was perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven and healthy-looking, with the kind of glow that comes from eating well and getting enough sleep. Everything about him screamed money and success. But there was something about his eyes that made Madison's heart skip a beat. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured, with just a hint of something familiar that Madison couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you tell me how to get to Riverside Apartments from here?" Madison studied his face more carefully, that nagging sense of familiarity growing stronger. "2 blocks that way," she said, pointing east down Morrison Street. "Take a right on 12th, and it's the big complex on the left. Building 47 is in the back." The man smiled, and in that smile, Madison caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch in her throat. It was subtle, just a slight crinkling. Around the eyes, a particular way his mouth curved, but it sparked a memory that made her heart race. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed directed specifically at her. "You're very kind to help a stranger." As the BMW began to pull away from the curb, Madison suddenly called out, "Wait!" The car stopped, and the window rolled down again. The man looked at her expectantly. "What's your name?" Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated for just a moment, and in that hesitation, Madison saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, hope, and something that might have been tears. "Michael," he said quietly. "My name is Michael Chen." Madison felt like the world had stopped spinning. The snow continued to fall around them, but she was no longer cold. All she could do was stare at this well-dressed, successful-looking man and try to reconcile him with the broken, desperate person she'd met in that alley 5 years ago. "Michael," she repeated, her voice full of wonder. "Oh my God, you kept your promise. You got better." Michael's composure finally cracked, and tears began to stream down his cheeks. "Madison Parker," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking for you for 5 years." Michael Chen sat in his BMW outside the Riverside Apartments, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the leather steering wheel. After 5 years of searching, 3 different private investigators, countless sleepless nights, and more money than he cared to calculate, he had finally found her. The little angel who had saved his life with a single act of pure kindness was living just 2 blocks away from where their lives had first intersected. The journey from that cold alley to this moment had been nothing short of miraculous, though it hadn't been easy. That night, after Madison had walked away, Michael had sat in that alley for hours, turning her crumpled dollar bill over and over in his hands. Something about her selfless gesture had awakened something inside him that he'd thought was dead forever: hope. The next morning, he'd used Madison's dollar to buy a cup of coffee and a newspaper from a corner vendor. The coffee had been terrible, but it was warm. And for the first time in months, Michael had felt like he might be able to think clearly. As he'd sat in the doorway of a closed shop, sipping the bitter coffee and trying to avoid the bitter wind, he'd flipped through the newspaper looking for job listings, help-wanted ads, anything that might give him a direction to move toward. That's when he'd seen the article that would change everything. Local tech incubator announces homeless innovation. Challenge. Indeed. The article described a new competition being sponsored by Portland Development Group, specifically designed to help people experiencing homelessness develop business ideas that could address social problems while creating sustainable income. The grand prize was $50,000 in seed funding, plus 6 months of free office space and access to business mentors. But more importantly to Michael, It was a chance to turn his skills and experience into something meaningful again. He'd spent that entire day in the public library, using their computers to research the competition and develop his idea. It was elegant in its simplicity, an app that would connect people experiencing homelessness with local resources, job opportunities, and temporary housing. But unlike other similar apps, this one would be designed by someone who had actually lived the problem, who understood the daily indignities and challenges that most app developers had never even considered. Michael had lived through the frustration of not knowing which shelters had space available, which employers might be willing to hire someone without a permanent address, which churches served meals on which days. He'd experienced the humiliation of being turned away from services because of bureaucratic red tape, or because funding had run out, or simply because the person behind the desk was having a bad day. His app would solve those problems by creating a real-time network of information and opportunities, constantly updated by both service providers and users themselves. It would include features like digital storage for important documents, since people experiencing homelessness often lost their IDs, social security cards, and other essential paperwork. It would have a job board specifically for employers who were willing to work with people in transitional housing situations. It would even include a rating system for service providers, giving homeless individuals a voice in improving the services. Designed to help them, working 18-hour days in the library, surviving on free coffee refills and whatever food he could find, Michael had spent 3 weeks developing his business plan. He'd written it longhand on notebook paper he'd found in the library's recycling bin, then typed it up during the brief windows when computers were available. The presentation day had been terrifying. Michael had managed to clean himself up somewhat. A friend from his old life had let him shower and borrow a decent shirt and tie, but he still looked like what he was, a man who had been living rough for months. The other competitors were mostly young entrepreneurs with MBAs and venture capital connections. Michael was convinced he didn't have a chance, but when he'd stood up to present his idea, something magical had happened. Maybe it was the raw authenticity of his experience. Or maybe it was the passion in his voice when he talked about Madison and the kindness that had inspired him to keep going. Whatever it was, the judges had listened with an attention and respect that Michael hadn't experienced in years. When they'd announced his name as the winner, Michael had broken down crying right there on stage, clutching Madison's dollar bill in his pocket like a talisman. The $50,000 had been just the beginning. Within 6 months, Homebridge Technologies had attracted additional investors who were impressed not just by the business plan, but by Michael's story and his commitment to actually solving problems rather than just making money. The app had launched 18 months later to overwhelming demand from both service providers and users. But the real breakthrough had come when major cities started licensing the technology for their own homeless services departments. What had started as a simple app had evolved into a comprehensive platform that was now being used in over 200 cities across the United States and Canada. Homebridge Technologies was now valued at over $200 million, with Michael holding a controlling stake as founder and CEO. He lived in a beautiful house in the Pearl District, drove expensive cars, and had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. But none of it felt complete without being able to find Madison and properly thank her for giving him the hope to start over. Finding her had been harder than he'd expected. Parker was a common name, and Madison Parker without a middle initial or specific address had proven to be like looking for a needle in a haystack. The investigators he'd hired had found dozens of Madison Parkers throughout Oregon and Washington, but none of them had been the right little girl. It was only when he'd started specifically searching for Madison Parkers who might be in difficult financial circumstances, checking public assistance records, school lunch program eligibility, and other databases that his money and connections could access, that he'd finally gotten a lead. Madison Parker, now 10 years old, currently residing at 1247 Morrison Street, apartment 2B, with mother Christina Parker and sister Ashley Parker. The address was just 6 blocks from where they'd first met. Michael had driven by the building twice in the past week, trying to work up the courage to approach. How do you knock on someone's door and explain that their daughter had saved your life 5 years ago with a dollar bill? How do you tell them that you've become wealthy beyond measure and you want to share that wealth without sounding like either a crazy person or someone with ulterior motives? Now, sitting outside the rundown apartment complex, Michael realized that no amount of planning could prepare him for this moment. He stepped out of his BMW, immediately feeling overdressed in his expensive suit. The neighborhood was rough, broken streetlights cast uneven shadows, graffiti covered most available surfaces, and the smell of poverty and desperation hung in the air like fog. Building 47 was a 3-story brick complex that had probably been decent housing sometime in the 1970s. Now it showed decades of deferred maintenance, peeling paint, cracked windows held together with duct tape, rusty fire. Escapes that looked more dangerous than helpful. The parking lot was full of potholes, and several of the cars looked like they hadn't run in years. Michael climbed the concrete stairs to the second floor, noting the broken railing and the flickering fluorescent light in the hallway. The whole building felt fragile, temporary, like it was one bad month away from being condemned. Apartment 2B was at the end of the hallway, and as Michael approached, he could hear voices through the thin walls. The sound insulation in this building was practically non-existent, which meant that privacy was a luxury these families couldn't afford. "Ashley, we're 3 months behind on rent again," came a woman's voice, tired and strained with the kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep. "Mr. Rodriguez says if we don't have the full amount by Friday, we're out. That's $840, plus the late fees." "Mom, I'm doing everything I can," came Ashley's voice, older now but still, carrying the weight of responsibility that Michael remembered hearing in Madison's voice, even when she was 5. "The diner is only giving me 30 hours a week because of the new labor laws. And with winter coming, tips are getting smaller. People are tightening their belts everywhere." "Maybe I could get a job after school," came a third voice, one that made Michael's heart stop completely. "Madison, absolutely not," Christina Parker said firmly, with the kind of maternal authority that brooked no argument. "You're 10 years old, baby. Your job is to go to school and be a kid. We'll figure something else out." "But Mom, I'm good at finding ways to help. I found $12 last week just by helping Mrs. Chen carry her groceries. And yesterday, Mr. Martinez at the bodega said he might be able to use me to sweep the floors after school if—" "No, Madison," Christina interrupted. "We've talked about this. I will not have my 10-year-old daughter working to support this family. That's my job, and I'll find a way to make it work." Michael closed his eyes, feeling a mix of admiration and heartbreak at what he was hearing. Here was Madison, still trying to take care of everyone around her, still putting others' needs before her own. And here was her mother, fighting to preserve her daughter's childhood, even in the face of what sounded like impending homelessness. He raised his hand and knocked softly on the door, his knuckles barely making contact with the thin wood. The voices inside went completely quiet. "Who could that be at this hour?" Christina whispered, and Michael could hear the fear in her voice. Late-night visitors in neighborhoods like this were rarely good news. Footsteps approached the door, and Michael heard the sound of multiple locks being undone. Deadbolt, chain lock, what sounded like a door bar. The level of security spoke to the dangers these women faced living in this area. The door opened just a crack, held by a security chain, and Michael found himself looking into the tired eyes of a beautiful blonde woman in her early 30s. Even exhausted and worn down by years of struggle, Christina Parker had the kind of natural beauty that would have turned heads in any other circumstances. But these weren't other circumstances, and Michael could see the wariness and fear in her expression as she looked at this well-dressed stranger standing outside her door. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, not opening the door any wider. "Mrs. Parker? I'm looking for Madison Parker. My name is Michael Chen." The wariness in Christina's eyes sharpened into protective suspicion. "Who's asking? What do you want with my daughter?" Michael had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but now that he was here, the words seemed inadequate. "Mrs. Parker, I know this is going to sound strange, but 5 years ago, your daughter saved my life." There was a long pause as Christina processed this information. Michael could see her trying to decide whether he was crazy, dangerous, or telling the truth. "What are you talking about?" she asked. It was December 15th, 2018. Madison was 5 years old. She was in an alley behind Romano's Italian kitchen, and she gave me a dollar bill. It was all the money she had, and she gave it to a complete stranger because she thought I needed it more than she did. The door closed for a moment as Christina removed the chain, then opened fully. Behind her, Michael could see Ashley, now a striking 19-year-old with her mother's blonde hair and the kind of mature beauty that comes from taking on adult responsibilities too young. And there, peeking around her sister's shoulder, was Madison. Madison stepped forward, her blue eyes studying Michael's face with the same intense curiosity she'd shown 5 years ago. She was taller now, her blonde hair longer, but she still had that same gentle wisdom in her expression that had struck him so powerfully when she was 5. "I know you," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "You're the man from the alley. You're Michael." Michael's carefully maintained composure cracked like an eggshell, and tears began to flow down his cheeks unchecked. "Yes, Madison, I'm that man, and I've been looking for you for 5 years. Christina looked back and forth between them, her maternal instincts still on high alert, but her confusion evident. "I don't understand what's happening here." "Mom," Madison said, never taking her eyes off Michael's face, "this is the man I told you about. The one I gave my dollar to that night when you were working late, and Ashley was at her friend's house." "Oh, my God," Christina whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as the memory came flooding back. Madison had come home that night talking excitedly about helping a sad man, about giving him her dollar because he looked hungry. Christina had been proud of her daughter's compassion, but also terrified that Madison had been talking to strangers. She'd made Madison promise never to do something like that again. Michael knelt down to Madison's level, just as he had 5 years ago in that alley. But this time he was the one with clean clothes and a full stomach, and she was the one who looked like she hadn't eaten recently. "Madison Parker," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That dollar you gave me wasn't just money. It was hope. It was proof that there was still goodness in the world when I thought everything good had died, and it literally saved my life." Madison tilted her head with that same curious gesture she'd made as a 5-year-old. "What happened after that night? Did you find your daughter Emma?" The fact that she remembered Emma's name after all these years hit Michael like a physical blow. "Madison, what happened after that night is that I used your dollar to buy a coffee and a newspaper. In that newspaper, I found an article about a business competition. I entered that competition with an idea that came from living on the streets, from understanding what it felt like to be homeless and hopeless." He gestured to his expensive suit, his clean appearance. "I won that competition, Madison. I started a company called Homebridge Technologies. We make apps and software that help people who are experiencing homelessness connect with resources and opportunities. And that company is now worth over $200 million. Ashley and Christina exchanged glances, clearly not believing what they were hearing. "But the whole time," Michael continued, through every success, every milestone, every moment. When I thought I'd finally made it, all I could think about was finding you. Finding the little girl who gave a stranger everything she had without asking for anything in return, without even asking my name or where I came from. It was just $1, Madison said quietly, unconsciously echoing the same words she'd spoken 5 years earlier. No, sweetheart, Michael said, reaching into his jacket pocket. It was everything. It was hope when I had none. It was proof that kindness still existed when I thought the world had forgotten what kindness meant. Michael pulled out a worn, laminated dollar bill from his inner jacket pocket, handling it with the reverence someone might show a religious artifact. Madison's eyes widened as she recognized it immediately. It was her dollar, the one she'd given him 5 years ago, but now it was protected in clear plastic and looked like it had been carefully preserved. "You kept it?" she whispered, reaching out with one small finger to touch the plastic covering. "I've carried it with me every single day for 5 years, Michael said, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's been my reminder that no matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless everything seems, there are still angels walking among us. It's been my proof that one person's kindness can change everything." Christina sank into the threadbare couch nearby, overwhelmed by what she was hearing. The apartment was small and sparse, just a living room that doubled as Madison's bedroom, one tiny bedroom that Christina and Ashley shared, and a kitchenette with appliances that looked like they'd been second-hand when they were installed 20 years ago. But it was clean and filled with evidence of a family that loved each other. Hand-drawn pictures on the refrigerator, books from the library stacked neatly on milk crates that served as tables, Ashley's work uniform hanging carefully on a hook by the door. "I can't believe this is real," Christina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This kind of thing doesn't happen to people like us." "Mrs. Parker," Michael said, standing and turning to face her directly, "I need you to know something. Your daughter didn't just give me money that night. She gave me faith in humanity. She taught me that even when you have absolutely nothing, you can still choose to give. She showed me what real wealth looks like, and it has nothing to do with money." He looked around the small apartment, taking in the water-stained ceiling, the furniture held together with duct tape and hope, the empty space where a television might be if they could afford one. Through the thin walls, they could hear neighbors arguing, a baby crying, the sounds of other families struggling to make it through another day. "And now, I want to give back," Michael continued. "I want to show you the same kindness that Madison showed me, but I want to do it in a way that honors your dignity and your family's strength." Christina shook her head quickly, her protective instincts kicking in. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate what you're saying, but we can't accept charity. We don't take handouts. We've always found a way to make it on our own, and we'll keep finding a way." "This isn't charity," Michael said gently, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to navigate complex emotional situations through years of business negotiations and personal growth. "This is paying forward a debt I'll never be able to fully repay. And more than that, it's an investment in the future." Ashley stepped forward, her protective instincts matching her mother's. She'd been working since she was 16, contributing everything she could to keep the family afloat, and she'd learned to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good to be true. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, crossing her arms and studying Michael's face for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Michael had spent months planning for this moment, working with lawyers and accountants and human resources specialists to structure his offer in a way that would feel like an opportunity rather than charity. "Mrs. Parker," he said, focusing on Christina, "I'd like to offer you a job. A real job with a competitive salary, full health benefits, vacation time, and opportunities for advancement. A job that will let you take care of your family with dignity, while using your skills and life experience to help other people." Christina blinked in surprise, her mouth opening slightly before she found her voice. "What kind of job? I never finished high school, Mr. Chen. I dropped out when I got pregnant with Ashley when I was 17. I don't have a college degree or any special training. I've been cleaning offices and serving coffee for most of my adult life." "Experience matters more than degrees," Michael replied firmly. "Mrs. Parker, I run a company that helps people experiencing homelessness and financial hardship. I need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone with real compassion and real-world experience. I need someone who knows what it feels like to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, someone who understands the daily dignity of working multiple jobs to keep your family together." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Christina. "The position is Community Outreach Coordinator. You'd be working directly with clients, helping them navigate resources, connecting them with services, and providing support as they work to rebuild their lives. The starting salary is $65,000 a year, plus full medical and dental coverage for your entire family." Christina's hands shook as she opened the folder and looked at the job description. $65,000 was more money than she'd made in the past 2 years combined. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why would you offer this to someone you don't even know?" "Because Madison vouched for you 5 years ago," Michael said simply. "A 5-year-old child who was willing to give everything she had to help. A stranger learned that kindness from somewhere. She learned it from a mother who taught her that helping others is more important than helping yourself. That's exactly the kind of person I need on my team." Madison had been listening to this conversation with wide eyes, trying to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "What about me and Ashley?" she asked. "What happens to us?" Michael smiled, and for the first time since arriving, it was a completely relaxed, genuine smile. "Ashley, you're 19. If you want to finish high school, my company has partnerships with several programs that help working adults complete their education. If you want to go to college, we have scholarship programs and tuition reimbursement. Or if you want to start working immediately, we have entry-level positions with room for growth." He turned to Madison. "And you, sweetheart, get to be a kid. You get to go to school every day, play with friends, join clubs or sports teams if you want to. You get to have sleepovers and birthday parties and all the things that 10-year-old girls should get to have. Most importantly, you never have to worry about whether there's going to be food on the table or whether you're going to have a place to sleep." "This is too much," Christina said, tears streaming down her face. "We can't accept this. It's too generous, too." "Mom," Madison said softly, walking over and taking her mother's hand. "Remember what you always tell me, that good things happen to good people, and we just have to be patient and wait for our turn." Christina looked down at her daughter, this wise little girl who had somehow retained her optimism and faith despite everything they'd been through together. Madison's eyes were bright with hope and excitement, but also with a maturity that no 10-year-old should have to possess. "Maybe this is our turn," Madison continued, squeezing her mother's hand. Michael watched the family dynamic, seeing so clearly the love and strength that had kept them together despite their circumstances. It reminded him painfully of his own family, the one he'd lost when his world fell apart 5 years ago. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said quietly, his voice taking on a more somber tone. "The reason I became homeless in the first place, the reason I was in that alley that night, was because I trusted the wrong business partner. His name was David Martinez, and he was embezzling money from our company for over 2 years before I discovered it." Christina's face went pale at the mention of the name Martinez. "He disappeared with almost $500,000, leaving me holding all the debt and legal responsibility," Michael continued. I lost everything overnight, my business, my house, my savings, my car. And when the money ran out and the creditors started calling and the lawyers got involved, my wife Sarah couldn't handle the stress. She took our daughter Emma and left. Said she couldn't watch me destroy our family's future. Emma, Madison repeated softly. Did you ever find her? Michael's expression grew pained. I know where she is. Sarah remarried a man named Robert Kim, and they live in Seattle now. Emma's 15, and from what I can tell through social media, and the occasional report from my lawyer, she's doing well. But Sarah still won't let me see her. She says I'm not stable enough, that I haven't proven I can maintain a normal life for long enough to be trusted around Emma. That's terrible, Ashley said, her anger evident. You've obviously turned your life around completely. You're successful, stable. Success isn't the same as healing, Michael said quietly. Sarah's not wrong to be cautious. I spent almost a year living on the streets, struggling with depression and anger and feelings of worthlessness. Even after I started the company and began making money again, it took me a long time to deal with the emotional damage from losing everything. He looked directly at Madison. But knowing that I was going to find you someday, knowing that I had to be worthy of the gift you gave me, that's what kept me going through the hardest times. Christina had been quiet during this exchange, but now she stood up abruptly and walked to the small window that looked out over the parking lot. Below, they could see a police car with its lights flashing, responding to some kind of disturbance. In the distance, sirens wailed, and they could hear the ongoing argument from the neighbors upstairs. Christina, Ashley said softly, using her mother's first name the way she did when she was worried. I'm scared, Christina admitted, not turning around. What if this is some kind of mistake? What if something goes wrong and we end up worse off than we are now? Michael approached her carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. Mrs. Parker, I understand your fear completely. 5 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Desperate, scared, not sure who to trust or whether I could take a risk on something that seemed too good to be true. The last time I trusted someone completely, Christina said quietly, her voice barely audible. He left us with nothing. Madison's father, James Parker, promised me the world when we got married. He was charming and handsome and full of big dreams and bigger promises. He was going to take care of us, provide for our family, give us the life we deserved. She turned slightly, and Michael could see tears glistening in her eyes. Instead, he emptied our savings account and disappeared when Ashley was 5 and Madison was just 6 months old. Left us with a mountain of debt and a note saying he wasn't ready for the responsibility of a family. I haven't heard from him since. I'm not asking you to trust me completely right away, Michael said gently. I'm asking you to trust Madison's judgment. She saw something in me 5 years ago that I couldn't see in myself. She believed I could get better when I had stopped. Believing it myself. Maybe she can see something in this situation that you can't see right now. Madison walked over to her mother and slipped her small hand into Christina's larger one. Mama, remember the story you used to tell me about angels? When I was little, Christina smiled despite her tears, remembering the countless nights she'd told Madison bedtime stories to help her fall asleep in whatever temporary housing they'd managed to find. That they don't always have wings and halos like in the pictures. You said that sometimes angels look like regular people, and they show up exactly when we need them most, even if we don't recognize them right away, Madison continued. Maybe Mr. Michael is our angel. Christina knelt down to Madison's level, studying her daughter's face. At 10 years old, Madison had already lived through more hardship than many adults, but she'd somehow managed to retain her compassion and optimism. If anyone could recognize an angel, it would be Madison. If I say yes, Christina said slowly, looking back up at Michael, what happens next? What are the practical steps? Next, Michael said, pulling out his phone, I call my assistant. and have her start the paperwork for your employment. You could start work on Monday if you wanted to. In the meantime, I'd like to help you move out of this apartment and into something safer and more stable." "Move where?" Ashley asked. "I own several properties around the city that I use for corporate housing and temporary situations," Michael explained. "There's a house in the Irvington district, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard for Madison to play in, and it's in the catchment area for some of the best schools in Portland. It's furnished and ready to move into immediately." Christina felt dizzy at the scope of what he was offering. "We can't afford a house in Irvington." "You wouldn't be paying rent," Michael said. "Consider it part of your compensation package. In a few years, when you're established in your career and ready to buy your own place, we can talk about transitioning. But for now, your family needs stability, and I have resources sitting empty that could provide that stability." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh streets in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Inside the small apartment, 3 women stood at the crossroads of a decision that would change their lives forever. "Mom," Ashley said quietly, "I think we should say yes." Christina looked at her daughters. Ashley, who had sacrificed her teenage years to help support the family, and Madison, who had somehow managed to change a stranger's life with nothing but kindness. Both of them were looking at her with hope and trust, believing that she would make the right decision for their family. "Michael," Christina said finally, her voice stronger now, "if we do this, I want to be clear about something. I won't just be taking your charity. If you give me this job, I'll work harder than anyone you've ever employed. I'll earn every penny of that salary, and I'll make sure you never regret taking a chance on our family." Michael smiled, and in that smile, all 3 women could see the same genuine kindness that Madison had recognized 5 years ago in a dark alley. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "something tells me that's exactly what Madison would have said if she could have articulated it when she was 5 years old. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a contract. "So, Christina Parker, would you like to start your new life on Monday?" As Christina reached for the pen, Madison noticed that the snow outside had stopped falling, and for the first time in years, the future looked bright and full of possibilities. 3 months had passed since that snowy December night when Michael Chen had knocked on their door, and Christina Parker still sometimes woke up expecting to find herself back in that cramped apartment on Morrison Street, as if the past few months had been nothing more than an elaborate dream. But every morning, she opened her eyes to the soft light filtering through the sheer curtains of her own bedroom, a real bedroom with space for a dresser, a reading chair, and even a small desk where she could pay bills without having to clear off the kitchen table. The house in Irvington had become more than just a place to live. It had become a home in ways Christina hadn't experienced since she was a child herself. Madison's adjustment had been the most remarkable to watch. Within weeks of moving in, she had transformed from a child who carried the weight of adult responsibilities into something Christina had almost forgotten was possible, a regular 10-year-old girl. She'd joined the school's art club and had made 3 close friends who came over for sleepovers and birthday parties. Her bedroom walls were now covered with drawings and certificates from school, and her laughter filled the house in ways that made Christina's heart ache with gratitude. Ashley had initially struggled more with the transition. At 19, she'd been working and contributing to the family's survival for so long that she didn't quite know how to be anything other than a provider. But Michael had been patient and understanding, helping her enroll in evening classes to complete her high school diploma while working part-time in Homebridge Technology's marketing department. "I want to earn this," Ashley had insisted during their first meeting at the company's sleek downtown offices. "I don't want to be here just because my little sister helped you out 5 years ago." Michael had smiled at her fierce independence, recognizing the same strength and dignity that ran through the entire Parker family. Ashley, you're here because you're smart, hard-working, and you understand our mission in ways that most people with MBA degrees never could. Madison might have opened the door, but you're walking through it on your own merit. Now, as Christina sat in her office at Homebridge Technologies, reviewing case files for the families she'd be visiting that afternoon, she marveled at how naturally the work had come to her. Her job title was Community Outreach Coordinator, but in practice, she was part social worker, part advocate, and part miracle worker for families experiencing homelessness and financial crisis. Her own experience had made her uniquely qualified to navigate the complex web of social services, non-profit organizations, and government programs that could help families get back on their feet. More importantly, when she sat across from a mother who was choosing between paying rent and feeding her children, that mother could see in Christina's eyes that she truly understood what that choice felt like. "Christina, do you have a minute?" Michael's voice came from her office doorway, interrupting her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing there with a slight frown on his face, holding what looked like a legal document. Over the past 3 months, their working relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Michael never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond her best professional effort, and Christina had never felt the need to be anything other than completely honest with him. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What's wrong? You look like someone just delivered bad news." Michael closed the office door behind him and sat down heavily. "I got a call from my lawyer this morning. Sarah's attorney contacted him about Emma." Christina felt her stomach drop. In the months since they'd started working together, Michael had shared pieces of his ongoing struggle to reconnect with his daughter. Despite his success, despite the stability he'd built, his ex-wife Sarah remained convinced that he wasn't ready to be a father again. "What did they say?" Christina asked gently. "Sarah's husband Robert got a job offer in London. They want to move to England permanently, and they're petitioning the court to allow them to take Emma with them." Michael's voice was carefully controlled, but Christina could see the pain in his eyes. "If the judge approves it, I might never see my daughter again." Christina leaned forward, her heart breaking for this man who had worked so hard to rebuild his life, partly motivated by the hope of eventually reuniting with his child. "What can you do to fight it? My lawyer says I need to prove that I'm not just financially stable, but emotionally and socially stable as well. I need to show that I have a support system, a community, a life that would be beneficial for Emma to be part of." Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Christina had learned meant he was trying to solve a problem that seemed impossible. "But you do have all of those things," Christina said. "You have a successful business, a beautiful home, employees who respect you, but I don't have a family," Michael said quietly. "I live alone in a house that's too big for one person. I work 12-hour days because I don't have anything else to go home to. And the closest thing I have to a social life is our monthly staff meetings." Christina studied his face, seeing clearly the loneliness that he usually kept hidden behind his professional success. It occurred to her that in many ways, Michael was as isolated as she and her daughters had been, just in a different way. "The court hearing is in 6 weeks. Michael continued. "My lawyer thinks I need to show them that I'm not just the man who lost everything 5 years ago, but that I'm someone who can provide Emma with a stable, loving home environment." "Michael," Christina said slowly, an idea beginning to form. In her mind, what if you didn't have to prove that alone? He looked at her questioningly. What if you had a family to introduce Emma to? Not just any family, but the family whose kindness changed your life in the first place. Michael's eyes widened as he began to understand what she was suggesting. "Christina, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking." Christina interrupted. I'm offering. Madison asks about Emma all the time, wondering if you've heard from her, hoping that someday she might get to meet the daughter of the man whose life she helped save. Ashley thinks of you as the older brother she never had. And I. She paused, realizing that what she was about to say would change everything between them. And I care about you, Michael. Not just as my employer, but as someone who became important to my family when we needed hope the most. If having us in your life in a more official capacity would help you get Emma back, then that's what we should do. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, hope, and something that looked like relief. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? He asked quietly. I'm suggesting that maybe the family that was brought together by a 10-year-old's kindness 5 years ago was always meant to be an actual family, Christina said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. I'm suggesting that maybe this isn't about you proving you're stable enough for Emma, but about all of us proving that love and commitment can take many different forms. The silence in the office stretched between them, filled with the weight of what they were both considering. Christina, Michael said finally, if we do this, if we take this step, it can't just be about Emma. It can't be a marriage of convenience that we dissolve once the custody issue is resolved. That wouldn't be fair to any of us, especially not to Madison and Ashley. I know, Christina said, her heart racing as she realized how much she wanted this to be real. Michael, I've been on my own for 10 years. I've raised my daughters by myself, made every important decision by myself, carried every burden by myself, and I was okay with that, because I thought it was what I had to do. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. But these past 3 months, working with you, seeing how you interact with Madison and Ashley, watching how you treat people with respect and kindness, I've remembered what it feels like to have a partner. Not just someone who provides financial security, but someone who shares the same values, someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Michael joined her at the window, standing close, enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth of his presence. I've been in love with you for 6 weeks, he said quietly, his honesty taking her breath away, but I didn't know how to tell you without making it seem like your job or your housing depended on how you responded. I didn't want you to ever feel like you owed me anything, especially not something as important as love. Christina turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of hope and vulnerability that she felt in her own heart. What if we don't owe each other anything? She said. What if this is just what it appears to be? 2 people who found each other at exactly the right time, for exactly the right reasons. Michael reached out and took her hand, the same gesture that Madison had made 5 years ago when she'd given him her dollar bill. Christina Parker, he said, his voice thick with emotion, will you marry me? Not because it will help with Emma, not because it makes practical sense, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you and your daughters always feel cherished and protected. Yes, Christina said without hesitation. Yes, Michael Chen, I will marry you. Because I love you too, and because I think Madison was right 5 years ago when she saw something in you that no one else could see. They stood there holding hands, looking out at the city where their lives had intersected in the most unlikely way, both of them feeling like they were finally home. We should probably tell the girls, Christina said eventually, though she made no move to let go of his hand. Madison's going to say she knew this was going to happen all along, Michael said with a laugh. Ashley's going to want to plan the wedding, Christina replied. She's been reading bridal magazines for the past month, and I couldn't figure out why. How did you know? Because Ashley sees everything, and she's been rooting for this longer than either of us have. Michael pulled Christina closer, wrapping his arms around her in a way that felt like coming home after a long journey. I love you, he whispered against her hair. I love you too, she whispered back. Now let's go home and tell our daughters. and that they're going to be sisters, and that we're going to bring Emma home where she belongs. The courthouse in downtown Portland was bustling with activity on the morning of March 15th, 2 months after Michael and Christina's quiet wedding ceremony in the backyard of their Irvington home. Madison, now 11, sat between her new stepfather and her mother, wearing her best dress and trying to understand why this day felt so important to everyone around her. "Remember," Michael's lawyer Janet Morrison was saying for the third time that morning, "the judge is going to want to see that Emma would be entering a stable, loving family environment. She's going to ask questions about your living situation, your support system, and your long-term plans for providing Emma with consistency." Madison squeezed Michael's hand, feeling his nervousness in the way his fingers trembled slightly. Over the past 2 months since the wedding, she'd grown to love Michael not just as the man whose life she'd helped save, but as a father figure who listened to her stories about school, helped her with homework, and never made her feel like her problems were too small to matter. "What if Emma doesn't want to live with us?" Madison asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in her mind for weeks. "What if she's happy in England and doesn't want to come back?" "Then we'll figure that out when the time comes," Christina said gently, stroking Madison's hair. "But sweetheart, sometimes people don't know what they want until they see what's possible." Ashley, now 20 and finishing her final semester of high school, looked up from the stack of character reference letters she'd been organizing. "Madison, do you remember what you told me about Mr. Michael that first night he came to our apartment?" Madison nodded. "I said he looked like he needed help, but also like he was someone who would help other people if he could." "That's right. And now Emma gets to find out if you were right about the helping other people part." The courtroom door opened, and Janet Morrison's assistant gestured for them to come inside. The family stood together, straightening clothes and taking deep breaths, preparing for what they all knew would be one of the most important hours of their lives. Judge Patricia Williams was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an authoritative presence that immediately commanded respect. She looked up as Michael and his family entered the courtroom, her expression neutral but attentive. On the other side of the courtroom sat Sarah Kim, Michael's ex-wife, with her husband Robert and their attorney. Madison stole a glance at Sarah, trying to see traces of Emma in her features. Sarah was an attractive woman with short brown hair and a nervous energy that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than in this courtroom. "Mr. Chen," Judge Williams began once everyone was seated, "I've reviewed the extensive documentation provided by both parties regarding your petition to prevent the relocation of your daughter Emma to London. I've also reviewed the equally extensive documentation provided by Mrs. Kim regarding her petition to relocate. This is clearly a complex situation that requires careful consideration of what would be in the best interests of the child." Michael stood when indicated, his posture straight and confident despite the anxiety Madison could see in his face. "Your Honor, 5 years ago I lost everything, my business, my home, my family. I made mistakes that hurt the people I loved most, and I understand why my ex-wife felt she had to protect our daughter by keeping her away from me during that time." Judge Williams nodded, consulting the papers in front of her. "But I want to show the court that I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I've rebuilt my life, not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. I've learned what real success looks like, and it's not measured in dollars or business achievements. It's measured in the relationships we build and the love we share with the people who matter most." He gestured toward Christina, Madison, and Ashley. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce my wife Christina and my daughters Madison and Ashley. Christina and I married 2 months ago, but our families have been connected for much longer than that." Judge Williams looked with interest at the 3 females sitting in the front row. "Mrs. Chen," she said, addressing Christina, I understand that you work for your husband's company. Can you tell me about your role there and how you came to be part of Mr. Chen's life?" Christina stood gracefully, her voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for Homebridge Technologies. My job is to help families experiencing homelessness and financial hardship connect with resources and opportunities that can help them rebuild their lives." She paused, looking at Michael with unmistakable love. "But my connection to Michael goes back much further than our professional relationship. 5 years ago, when Michael was homeless and sleeping in alleys, my daughter Madison encountered him one night when she was just 5 years old. Madison felt every eye in the courtroom turn toward her, and she sat up straighter, remembering what her mother had told her about being brave when it mattered. Madison gave Michael her last dollar that night," Christina continued. "Everything she had in the world, she gave to a stranger because she thought he needed it more than she did. That act of kindness became the catalyst for Michael's recovery and eventual success." Judge Williams leaned forward with obvious interest. "And how did you all reconnect after 5 years?" "Michael spent those 5 years looking for Madison," Christina explained. "When he finally found us, we were living in poverty, struggling to make ends meet. Michael didn't just offer us charity, he offered me a job and my family a chance at a real future. But more than that, he offered us a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves." "Madison," Judge Williams said, turning her attention to the 11-year-old girl who had started this entire chain of events. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Mr. Chen?" Madison stood up, her voice small but clear. "Your Honor, Michael is my dad now. Not because he married my mum, but because he loves us and takes care of us and listens to me when I have problems." She looked directly at the judge, her blue eyes bright with sincerity. "When I gave him my dollar 5 years ago, I didn't know he had a daughter. But now I know about Emma, and I really want to meet her. I want her to see that Michael isn't the sad man from the alley anymore. He's someone who makes pancakes on Saturday mornings and helps me with my science projects and tells me bedtime stories about brave princesses who save themselves." The courtroom was completely silent as Madison continued. "I think Emma would like our family. We're loud sometimes and we laugh a lot, and we always have room for one more person at the dinner table." Judge Williams nodded slowly, making notes. "On her papers, Ashley," she said, addressing the young woman who had been silently watching the proceedings, "what's your perspective on this situation?" Ashley stood with the poise of someone much older than her 20 years. "Your Honor, I've spent most of my life taking care of my family. When my biological father left us, I became the second parent, the backup provider, the one who made sure my little sister and my mom were okay. I learned to be suspicious of people who promise things they couldn't deliver." She looked at Michael with obvious affection. "But Michael has never made promises he couldn't keep. When he said he would give my mom a good job, he did. When he said he would make sure Madison could be a regular kid, he did. When he said he would love our family like we deserved to be loved, he did." Ashley's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Your Honor, Emma doesn't just have one parent fighting for her today. She has a whole family who wants her to come home. She has a stepmother who understands what it's like to be separated from someone you love. She has a stepsister who can't wait to share her bedroom and her friends and her entire world with her. And she has a stepfather who spent 5 years proving that he can keep his promises." On the other side of the courtroom, Sarah Kim was visibly emotional, tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to Ashley's testimony. Judge Williams called for a brief recess, during which the two families retreated to opposite sides of the hallway outside the courtroom. Madison noticed that Sarah kept looking over at them, her expression conflicted and sad. "Can I go talk to her?" Madison asked Christina quietly. "Sweetheart, I don't think that's appropriate right now. But she looks sad, Madison insisted, and she's Emma's mom. Maybe if I talked to her, she'd understand that we're not trying to take Emma away from her. We just want to love her too. Michael knelt, down to Madison's level, his expression serious but gentle. Madison, this is a very complicated situation for everyone involved. Sarah has been protecting Emma for 5 years because she was afraid I couldn't be a good father. She's not a bad person. She's just a scared mum who's trying to do what she thinks is best for her daughter. Then maybe I should tell her what you told me about scared people, Madison said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that constantly amazed the adults in her life. What did I tell you about scared people? You said that scared people usually just need someone to show them that there's another way to look at things, and that sometimes the scariest thing is hoping for something good to happen because you're afraid it won't work out. Michael looked at Christina, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Okay, he said, but I'm coming with you. Madison walked across the hallway with Michael beside her, approaching Sarah Kim with the same fearless compassion she'd shown 5 years ago in that alley. Mrs. Kim, Madison said softly. I'm Madison. I'm the one who gave Michael the $1. Sarah looked down at this confident, articulate girl who had somehow played a role in bringing them all to this moment. Hello, Madison, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I've heard a lot about you. I've heard a lot about Emma too, Madison replied. Michael shows us pictures of her sometimes, and he talks about how smart she is and how much he misses her. Sarah's composure cracked at the mention of her daughter. Mrs. Kim, Madison continued, I know you're scared about letting Emma come back to Portland, but I want you to know that if she does, she's going to have the best family in the whole world. We're going to love her so much, and we're never going to try to replace you or make her forget that you're her real mom. Sarah knelt down to Madison's level, studying this remarkable child who spoke with such maturity and compassion. You really believe that, don't you? Sarah asked. I know it, Madison said with absolute certainty, because Michael taught me that. When you love someone, you don't try to take away the other people they love. You just make room for more love. Sarah looked up at Michael, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years, not as the broken man who had lost everything, but as the kind, stable father that Emma deserved to have in her life. Michael, Sarah said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, if Emma comes back to Portland, are you going to try to turn her against me? Are you going to tell her that I was wrong to keep her away from you? Michael's answer came without hesitation. Sarah, I'm going to tell Emma that you protected her when I couldn't protect myself. I'm going to tell her that you made the hardest decision a parent can make because you loved her more. Then you loved the idea of keeping our family together. And I'm going to make sure she understands that having a father in Portland doesn't mean losing a mother who loves her. The courthouse hallway fell silent as Sarah considered his words. I want to meet them, she said finally, gesturing toward Christina and Ashley. Before I make any decisions, I want to meet the family that Emma would be joining. What happened next surprised everyone, including the lawyers. Sarah Kim stood up and walked across the hallway, extending her hand to Christina. Mrs. Chen, she said, I think it's time we talked. 2 hours later, the courtroom had transformed from a battleground into something resembling a family meeting. Judge Williams had allowed an unprecedented informal discussion between both parties, and what emerged was not a custody battle, but a conversation about what would truly be best for 15-year-old Emma. Sarah Kim sat beside Christina there, earlier antagonism replaced by the mutual understanding of two mothers who wanted the same thing, for Emma to be happy, secure, and loved. Ashley had shown Sarah photos from the past 2 months. Pictures of family dinners, Madison's birthday party, Christina and Michael's small wedding ceremony, providing a window into the life that Emma would be joining. Your Honor, Sarah said, Standing to address the judge, "I'd like to modify my petition." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by this development. "Mrs. Kim, are you sure you want to make changes at this point in the proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor. After speaking with Mr. Chen's family, I realized that my desire to take Emma to London was motivated more by my fear than by what would actually be best for her. Emma has been asking about her father for years, and I've been telling her that he wasn't ready to be part of her life. But I can see now that he is ready, and more than that, he's created exactly the kind of loving, stable environment that Emma needs." She looked at Michael, her expression filled with something that looked like relief. "Your Honor, I'd like to propose a different arrangement. Robert and I will delay our move to London for 1 year. During that time, Emma will live primarily with her father and his new family, but she'll spend weekends and holidays with us. This will give Emma the chance to reconnect with Michael while maintaining her relationship with me and Robert." Judge Williams looked intrigued. "Mr. Chen, how do you feel about this proposal?" Michael stood, his voice steady with emotion. "Your Honor, I think Sarah's proposal is perfect. It gives Emma time to adjust to having me back in her life without feeling like she has to choose between her parents. And it gives all of us time to prove that we can work together as a family, even if we're not all living under the same roof." "And what happens after the year is up?" Judge Williams asked. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances, and something passed between them that looked like understanding and mutual respect. "After the year is up," Sarah said, "we'll let Emma decide what she wants. If she wants to come to London with us, we'll arrange for regular visits with Michael. If she wants to stay in Portland, we'll arrange for regular visits with us. The most important thing," Michael added, "is that Emma never feels like loving. One parent means betraying the other. She's going to have 2 homes, 2 families who love her, and the freedom to be part of both." Judge Williams smiled for the first time all day. "That sounds like a very mature and loving solution. However, there's one person whose opinion we haven't heard yet, and she's the most important person in this room." The courtroom door opened, and a bailiff escorted a 15-year-old girl into the room. Emma Chen was tall for her age, with her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features. She looked around the courtroom with curiosity and apprehension, clearly unsure of what to expect. Madison felt her heart skip a beat as she saw Emma for the first time. This was the daughter that Michael talked about with such love and longing, the sister she'd been hoping to meet for months. "Emma," Judge Williams said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but we wanted you to have a chance to meet your father's new family before any final decisions are made about your living arrangements." Emma's eyes found Michael immediately, and Madison could see the complicated emotions playing across her face. Hope, anger, love, and hurt all mixed together. "Hi, Dad," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying years of separation and longing. "Hi, sweetheart," Michael replied, his voice breaking slightly. "You've grown so much. You're so beautiful." Emma looked at Christina, Ashley, and Madison with curiosity. "So you're my new family." Madison stood up before anyone could answer, her natural confidence and warmth taking over. "Hi, Emma. I'm Madison, and I'm really excited to meet you. Your dad talks about you all the time, and we've been hoping you'd come home for months." Emma studied Madison with interest. "You're the one who gave him the $1. "Yeah, but that was a long time ago. Now we're family, and I was hoping you'd want to be my big sister." For the first time since entering the courtroom, Emma smiled. "I've never had a little sister before." "I've never had a big sister before either," Madison replied. "But Ashley's been teaching me what sisters are supposed to do for each other, and I think you'll like it." Ashley stepped forward, her own smile warm and welcoming. "Emma, I know this is a lot to take in all at once, but I want you to know that we're not trying to replace your mom or your life in Seattle. We just want to add more love to it." "Christina," approached Emma with the gentle authority of someone who understood what it felt like to be a teenager caught between competing loyalties. "Emma, your father loves you more than anything in the world. For 5 years, the thing that motivated him to get better, to build a successful life, was the hope that someday he'd be worthy of being your father again. You don't have to decide anything today, but I hope you'll give us a chance to show you how much we'd love to have you as part of our family." Emma looked around the courtroom at all the adults who were waiting for her response, then back at Madison, who was practically vibrating with excitement and hope. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said to Madison. "Of course. When you gave my dad that $1, did you know it would lead to all this?" Madison considered the question seriously. "No, I didn't know it would lead to all this. But I knew he was someone worth helping, and I guess I hoped that good things would happen to him if someone showed him that people still cared." Emma nodded slowly, understanding something in Madison's answer that went beyond the words themselves. "Your Honor," Emma said, turning to address Judge Williams directly, "I'd like to try living with my dad and his family, but I want to keep seeing my mom and Robert too, just like they talked about." Judge Williams nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a very wise decision, Emma. And remember, nothing that's decided today is permanent. Families are flexible things, and arrangements can always be modified as circumstances change." "When do I start?" Emma asked, looking at Michael, with an expression that was part nervous, part excited. "How about this weekend?" Michael suggested. "We could pick you up Friday after school, and you could spend the weekend getting to know everyone. If it feels right, we can talk about making it more permanent." "I'd like that," Emma said. And for the first time, she sounded like a 15-year-old girl who was excited about the possibilities ahead of her rather than afraid of them. As the family left the courthouse together, Madison slipped her hand into Emma's, the same gesture of trust and friendship she'd shown 5 years ago with Michael. "Emma," she said, "want to know a secret?" "What?" "I made a wish the night I gave your dad that $1. I wished that someday the sad man would get to be happy again and have his family back." Emma squeezed Madison's hand. "That's a pretty good wish." "The best part is," Madison said with a grin, "it came true, and now I get a big sister out of it too." 3 months later, the Chen family was gathered around the dinner table in their Irvington home, celebrating Emma's 16th birthday. She'd decided to stay in Portland permanently, though she still spent holidays and summers with Sarah and Robert, who had decided to postpone their London move indefinitely. Emma had adapted to life with her new family with remarkable ease, bringing her own energy and personality to the household dynamics. She and Ashley had bonded over their shared experience of taking on adult responsibilities too young, while she and Madison had developed the kind of close sister relationship that Madison had always dreamed of. "Dad," Emma said as Michael lit the candles on her birthday cake, "I have something I want to tell everyone." The family gathered around the table, looking at Emma expectantly. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do after high school, and I've decided I want to study social work. I want to help families like we used to be, families who are struggling and need someone to believe in them." Christina reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "That's a beautiful goal, sweetheart. I want to work for Homebridge Technologies someday," Emma continued. "I want to be part of what we're building here, part of helping other people find their way back to each other." Michael's eyes filled with tears as he looked around the table at his complete family. Christina, who had taught him what real partnership looked like. Ashley, who had shown him that strength came in many forms. Madison, who had saved his life with her pure kindness. And Emma, who had forgiven him and chosen to come home. "You know what, Emma?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think that's exactly what this family was meant to do. We were meant to help other people believe that no matter how broken things seem, there's always a way back to love." Madison, now 11, and growing into the remarkable young woman she was destined to become, raised her glass of apple cider. To families, she said with the same wisdom she'd shown 5 years ago in a dark alley. And to second chances, and to finding each other when we need it most. To families, the rest of the table echoed, and as they clinked glasses, snow began to fall outside their windows, covering the world in the same blanket of hope and possibility that had brought them all together on that December night when a little girl decided to share everything she had with a stranger who needed it more. The dollar bill that had started it all now sat framed on Michael's desk at Homebridge Technologies, not as a trophy of his success, but as a reminder that the most important currency in the world isn't money. It's kindness, compassion, and the willingness to see the best in others, even when they can't see it in themselves. And every day, as families walked through the doors of Homebridge Technologies, looking for help and hope, they were greeted by that same spirit of generosity that had once motivated a 5-year-old girl to give everything she had to a complete stranger. Because some gifts keep giving, some kindnesses create ripples that last forever, and some families are built not by blood or law, but by love and the simple belief that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Madison Parker Chen had learned that day in the alley that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have kind hearts and the courage to act on them. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they become your family.